Good afternoon, and welcome to Tulane University. It is my pleasure to introduce our next session, a conversation with Drew Marsh. If time allows at the end of the session, the panel will take questions submitted by the audience. To submit a question, please scan the QR code located on the screen. Please be sure to silence your cell phones. Enjoy the conversation, and please join me in giving a warm welcome to our moderator, President Michael A. Fitz.
So welcome back. I'm here to introduce our next panel and a very special guest. Drew Marsh is the Chair and Chief Executive Officer of Entergy, Fortune 500 integrated energy company that serves 3 million customers across 4 states. He focuses on customer-driven energy solutions that balance reliability, resilience, sustainability with customer affordability. So he's got the whole gamut. This approach has earned him a number of accolades for the company. Earlier this year, Entergy was named to Fortune magazine's World's Most Admired Companies list, as well as the Just 100 rankings by Just Capital and CNBC, which recognize the top US 100 companies for their service to customers, employees, communities, the environment, and other stakeholders. Drew earned a bachelor's in mechanical engineering from Notre Dame and a master's in management from the Kellogg School of Northwestern University. He joined Entergy in 1998 and worked his way up the ranks, eventually serving as Chief Financial Officer before becoming CEO in 2022. And under his leadership, the company has invested more than $10 billion in transmission and distribution infrastructure. Over the next 3 years, they plan to invest $37 billion in generation, transmission, and distribution infrastructure. Entergy has been a key player in attracting major multi-billion-dollar projects to the Gulf South, from Meta and Amazon's new data centers to Hyundai's new steel manufacturing facility. As a 27-year veteran of the company, Drew has a deep understanding of Entergy, the communities it serves, and the energy landscape writ large. Needless to say, this is critical as we move into the age of artificial intelligence. I am delighted to have the opportunity to chat with Drew about the evolution of the energy industry. Nobody has more insight into how it's evolving. So I am, without further ado, please welcome Drew Marsh.
Hello?
Can you hear me? People hear us? Yes, okay, all right, thank you. First, before we begin, I want to direct everyone in the audience to the QR code on the screens where you can submit questions. And we're going to do our best to allow time for a Q&A, but time may go very quickly. But you can email your questions to us, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So, Drew, I must say, I mean, I'm a lawyer and have spent a lot of time thinking about a lot of different issues that impact our country and society. But quite frankly, energy seems as tough as they come. It brings as many different issues to the fore in our society. And there are really no easy answers. And that's why, quite frankly, I think it's great to talk to somebody who is at the center of the industry. And I like to think of a university that's trying to grapple with these questions. So I want to sort of think them through and discuss them. So just starting out with at 10,000 feet, the energy industry has really changed from the time you started in the energy industry.
No doubt.
How is it different now than when you started?
Well, well, first of all, let me just say thank you for that elaborate introduction, because I don't think I deserve probably half of those remarks that you gave me, but certainly appreciate it. When I started back in 1998, we weren't really growing. We were in the midst of all kinds of different events that would cause electric sales to essentially stay flat. So we would have a recession, we'd have a storm, we'd have a customer decide to build their own generation, whatever the reason was. And so my first dozen years at the company, our sales growth was zero. And then, coming out of the Great Recession, the industrial growth in Louisiana along the Gulf Coast really started to take off. And so we started to have industrial sales growth from LNG and from petrochemical facilities and from refinery expansions and steel mills and auto manufacturers that started to approach 5% annually. So we've had that for about 15 years, which has been really great. Of course, now we're looking at data centers. And we've announced some large data centers in Louisiana, but not just in Louisiana, also in Mississippi and now in Arkansas. Some very large data centers, trillion-dollar companies that are building these things. And now our sales growth is more like 13% for the next few years. That's a very different shift to go from a company that is trying to almost not necessarily keep your head above water, but you're not going anywhere fast when your sales growth is zero, to a place where today, we're talking about 13% growth, and as we look out to 2050, we think we could triple or quadruple our sales. So there's just a lot going on out there, and it's all related to some of the industrial growth that's happening.
Is it? I mean, what part of that is AI, and what part is other types of change?
Yeah, well, I think the base sort of 5% growth that we've had for the last 15 years, that's still out there. That's things like onshoring and reshoring of manufacturing from all over the world. And that's driven by the competitive advantages that we have here. So if you think about where we are, I keep hitting this microphone, I'm a hand talker. Where we sit, along the Mississippi River and along the Gulf Coast, we have access to global markets. We have incredible infrastructure in Louisiana along the coast. So we have rail and highway access to anywhere in the country. We have incredible pipeline infrastructure. Pretty much any kind of energy you can move out of the Gulf Coast to other parts of the country. And then, of course, we also have welcoming communities. We have available workforce. We have supportive government for investment. And all these things sort of combine to make this a really great place. And when you add in the fact that we have really low energy prices, it becomes competitive against anywhere in the world. It starts with natural gas, but the electricity prices that we have in Louisiana are some of the lowest in the nation. So all of those combine to make it a really exciting place to invest.
So does that mean we're going to be the next Silicon Valley?
I don't know about Silicon, but something's coming.
But as we were talking before, Pennsylvania, with great fanfare, announced that with the energy production in Pennsylvania juxtaposed against sort of University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon would make it the next Silicon Valley. Is that?
Yeah, well, we're trying to come up with a name for it, like Sweet Tea Valley or something like that, something that's more appropriate for where we are. There's a corridor between Jackson, Mississippi, and Shreveport where a lot of this investment is coming in. So that's along the lines of where Amazon, AWS, announced their data center infrastructure initial investment, we think, is going to be in the Jackson area. And then if you sort of move down I-20 into Louisiana across the river, you get to Richland Parish where Meta's investment is going in. So there's opportunities in that space. We have had some other investment come up. There's a data center that's looking to come in just north of Baton Rouge. So that's another space where we're looking, and then there's a number of other sites that people are looking at all over the northern parts of the state. They are actually coming a little closer to the coast as they get more comfortable with our resilience investments. So historically, the data centers are like, well, I don't really want to be near the coast. I want to be further away. But as our resilience investments have continued to improve, and as our track record around storm response has continued to improve, they are starting to think maybe they could get a little closer to the coast. So that's where we're seeing some of that as well.
So we talked a lot about, data centers have been sort of front and center in terms of the public discussion at this point. And what's amazing is literally the first data center in Louisiana was announced a year, literally in the past year at this conference. But what exactly does it mean when you build a data center in terms of jobs across the spectrum for people in Louisiana? What are we talking about?
Yeah, well, and there's a lot more than just jobs too,
right.
But I'll start with jobs. So in the case of Meta, they said you're going to have upwards of 5,000 to 7,000 workers on the site building it. And if you go online and you see some of the pictures of the site, they have drone footage, and it's pretty high up in the air, and it has these dump trucks moving around. They look like little Tonka trucks. They're so small. But these are gigantic trucks. The scale of this site is hard to actually fathom. And I always wonder if they're actually doing anything. I see people moving dirt all around, like how could that actually be useful? But it's all very well controlled, and that thing is starting to come up out of the ground. And it's one gigantic site. And then once it's up and running, they have said, and they've committed to Louisiana, they would bring 500 jobs into Richland Parish. Based on everything that we see, we expect it to actually probably be a little bit higher than that. And that's just the first wave. So the first wave that we've signed up with Meta, they have publicly disclosed about 2 gigawatts of compute. That's just the silicon, and I say it's a ton of little fans spinning and organizing of electrons, 2 gigawatts of that. And that doesn't include all the cooling infrastructure and the other ancillary infrastructure that also needs electricity. So that's more electricity on top of that. That's the 500 jobs. And then, they had a big conference in Pennsylvania that you were referencing. Right before that conference, they announced that they're intending to expand, and they said up to 5 gigawatts of compute. So, another 150% on top of that, which is, maybe another 500 jobs, maybe I don't know how they do their math exactly. I don't know if it's linear or not, but a lot more jobs, I assume, would be required for a much larger footprint. And so those are all.
And what type of jobs are we talking?
Well, these are technical jobs. Some of them would be data jobs. A lot of them would be technical jobs, electrician type jobs, professional jobs. I think they said that the average salary would be in the 70,000 plus range. So these are really good paying jobs. And Richland Parish is excited to have this kind of influx from a jobs perspective. But I think there's more to what the opportunity is than just the jobs piece, because these data centers, when you think about somebody like Meta, they really want to be good neighbors to the community. So beyond the jobs, they're making billions of dollars of investment. That's going to be a lot of tax dollars. And then there's spin-off from that. So we're going to be building a couple of plants in Richland Parish right next to the data center site. That's another couple of $1 billion of investment. And jobs that go along with that. That's probably going to be about 50 more jobs to run those couple of plants. And then, there's probably other businesses that are going to be coming into the area to support the plant. So there's going to be a multiplier effect associated with that. And then the state will also benefit from it. The state will get their own share of some of the tax dollars and the job growth that's part of that. But these good neighbors, they're paying for all the incremental electricity that they are producing, which is different than normally, right? Normally, if you buy a house on 8th Street in Baton Rouge or you say forget about buying. If you build a house, it's a new house, you're going to build it there, you're going to get the same rate as everybody else that has a house on that street, right? And that's normally what happens when an industrial customer comes in too, but they're not that big where you have to build 3 new plants and tons of transmission lines to serve them. So they know that they can't spread that cost to everybody else. It's not like you're building a house in Baton Rouge. What it is like, though, they say, okay, well, we want to be good neighbors. We're going to pick up the whole tab. And they're also on a standard tariff, which means that they get a portion of our overhead costs that our customers, our existing customers, would be already paying. They're going to get a portion of storm costs, storm costs that have already happened, storm costs that will happen in the future. They're going to pick up a portion of that. Those are costs that our customers would already be taking on. Any sort of compliance costs, transmission costs, or other things that come along, they're going to pick up a portion of that our customers would have had to take on. So those are benefits that are happening. And then, since they're adding so much infrastructure, transmission lines that are going hundreds of miles at high voltages, they're looping existing systems. They're adding reliability and resilience to the existing grid. So all the existing customers are going to have better reliability, better resilience as a result of these investments that are coming in. A lot of it's further away from the coast, so it's not as exposed, but it's also modern infrastructure that's built and tested to withstand higher winds. So all of that's creating benefits for people, not just in Richland Parish, but throughout the state.
So that's an important point, because a lot of people have asked questions about what is the impact of the data centers to people who are, customers at large. Does it mean their costs or prices are going to go up, their reliability is going to go down? And what you're suggesting is you're predicting the reverse, that in other words, more of the overhead costs will be picked up by the new, by the centers, as well as the reliability, that they're building a more resilient structure.
That is true. I would say there's a lot of, we know the world today is filled with misinformation, and floating around on social media, you can get a lot of things that you see like that. But, the reality is that they are picking up some of those costs. Some of the things that you might see on social media is costs have already gone up because of Meta. Well, they haven't gone up because of Meta. We're not expecting them to go up because of Meta. They certainly haven't gone up yet. Meta's not even there yet. They're just out there moving dirt around. So they haven't driven up costs for sure at this point. And we think that it's going to be beneficial long term, for our existing customers. I will say one more thing. It gives the existing customer base an opportunity to, for the same price, invest in more. So there is a very definite need for incremental reliability investment, incremental resilience investment, and that in and of itself can help attract more investment from other places, more in-migration from outside of the state as people invest in our communities for the same price. So there is, and that's not to say there isn't other bill pressures, because of, we have $2 billion of resilience investment approved in Louisiana by the Louisiana Public Service Commission. That, and everybody knows that is putting some pressure on bills, but that has a return on that investment that we are expecting.
I mean, a lot of people have talked recently. The South generally has been a growth area for jobs and population. Louisiana has been more challenged, it's safe to say. Do you think this development will help reverse that, or neutral? What's your guess?
Well, I hope it begins to reverse that.
Right.
I mean, it shows how open the state is for this kind of investment, to really be aggressive, to bring capital into the state, to put it to work, to put our people to work, and shows how excited the state is to participate. And it's not just the state itself, it's the communities involved, it's surrounding parishes, it's forums like this where we're talking about it, where we want to do more. And that all sort of compounds a signal out to people that are looking around for a place to invest. And when you add in all the advantages of the communities that we enumerated earlier, and put this kind of signal out on, hey, we really are open for incremental investment, incremental business. I think has a real potential to draw people in and reverse some of the trends that you're talking about. And we've heard anecdotal evidence where people have said, hey, my kid saw this investment, and they say, hey, maybe I should come back to Louisiana.
So, obviously we, Tulane, everybody has clean energy goals, admissions goals. You have a variety of different targets. How does this impact that you're just exploding in terms of your energy footprint?
Yeah, it makes it harder in the near term, but I think it has the potential to make it easier in the long term. So in the near term, to support Meta's investment, we filed and have received approval for 3 new combined cycle gas turbines. And those are about 2,000 megawatts of generation. But we also talked about 1,500 megawatts of solar and maybe another 500 megawatts of solar that they want to put to work too. So solar obviously is clean energy, but it's not around all the time. It's 1,500 megawatts versus the 2 gigawatts of compute, but that's up and down every day. You got to fill in the gaps. It doesn't serve around the clock need. The gas part of it does make it harder to meet our goals. Our goals are, by 2050 we want to be at net zero. By 2030 we want to be reduced by 50% from 2000. Those are our goals. It's going to be hard to meet the 2030 goal because we're adding a lot more gas generation right now. But part of what we have discussed with Meta is, hey, we're going to build this gas generation with you. You got to help make sure that this becomes clean. Because, if you leave out in the future and our existing customers are left with this gas generation and we got to clean it up, then they have to pay for it, but you're the one that put it in place. And they agree because their good neighbor concept is that they want to be good neighbors to the community, and that includes the clean generation. So, we have an agreement with them to where they're going to help us to clean that up. Now there's a technology available called carbon capture and sequestration, or carbon capture and storage for that. And that's another area where there's been a lot of misinformation about what that means. We've been capturing CO2 and putting it into the ground for decades in Louisiana and in Texas and other places. And we haven't had any problems with that. But there is a lot of concern out there for what does that mean when we do that. But having Meta committed to thinking about this stuff, thinking about how do we clean this up, in the long run will be better because they can bring their $2 trillion company to bear on this problem and help us to clean up. So when I look out to 2030, I think that's going to be tough. We're working hard to see how we can do that, but it's going to be hard. Going out to 2050, I think we still got a good shot at that because I think with folks like Meta committed to trying to figure these things out and the capacity that they bring to that problem, I think we'll find a way to do it.
My impression, and you're much closer to this than me, that there's been a sea change in Silicon Valley, that with artificial intelligence, they are now focused with, like a laser beam on exactly these issues where 10 years ago they were not. Is that an accurate description?
I don't know exactly how their thinking evolves. I can tell you the way that they've talked about it with us started with, hey, I want a bunch of solar panels and I want you to use those to run my data center. And if you talk about a gigawatt of solar panels around the clock, you're going to need multiples of the actual capacity. So if you set a gigawatt of generation need around the clock, you'd probably need, 4 gigawatts of solar, maybe 5 gigawatts of solar, 4 gigawatts of batteries, and then you still might need a backup gas turbine, just for the gaps that you couldn't cover off, at least with today's technology. And the capital outlay for that is enormous. And so, a lot of people have said that these folks aren't price sensitive. They are, because they're looking at that, and then they look at the gas turbines and they say, oh, well, that's a much better option for me now, financially. So they have gotten more aligned with gas turbines in the near term. We've been trying to make sure that Yeah, and they do want it to be clean. They never lost sight of that, even though they're doing gas now. But I think that they are very focused on costs right now and also getting online as fast as possible.
So, as somebody not certainly an expert in this space, my impression is that if we're going to be dealing with energy and energy generation over the next decade, we're going to have a multi-tiered approach. I mean, there's not going to be a single bullet. We don't know how technology will evolve. We don't know how innovation will evolve. So we need a strategy of all of the above, because going forward. Is that becoming more of a approach at Entergy and other government officials, or are we still figuring one thing's going to solve the issues?
I don't think there's a one thing. I think it's definitely diversity is going to help. Diversity of supply is going to help. The mathematics around that would say that you need diversity. I mean, you see that in all walks of life. I mean, everybody should have a diverse, equity portfolio, for example. I do not have a diverse equity portfolio. Mine is very lopsided on one side. So I would not be a model of that, but the math says that you should have a very diverse portfolio, and that would be the same thing when it comes to energy. So you would want to have a number of things. And you hear people throw that around, say all of the above all the time, and it does matter. I mean, if you could, maybe you can't serve a data center very easily with solar and battery exclusively. That doesn't mean there's not a place for that in the portfolio. There certainly is a place for that in the portfolio. It is, if you don't mind when the megawatt hours come, you can get them fairly cheaply with just solar. It's if you need them to be delivered all the time, it gets a little bit more expensive. So you just have to make the portfolio fit. So a combination of gas, solar, batteries, maybe some wind. We do have some coal plants still out there. And we have nuclear, and we're going to need more nuclear in the future.
So nuclear is a fascinating area. Of course, many years ago there was building lots of nuclear plants, and in some sense they were viewed as clean energy, though obviously you have the nuclear material that is a separate question. And then no nuclear plants were built for years. Does nuclear make sense now? Will it make more sense in the future? What's the attitude toward that?
I think nuclear definitely makes sense. And just for full disclosure, I'm a shill for the nuclear industry. I'm the chair of the Nuclear Energy Institute. I see the vice chair sitting over here as well, Mr. Jim Burke. So yeah, there's some nuclear people here in the room. But I think it makes sense in a lot of ways today. Certainly our existing fleet that we've already built and it's sitting there, we just cannot lose any more plants. I am, at Entergy, we own several plants up in the Midwest and Northeast that unfortunately were shut down because we could not make them work economically. And at the time, public consensus was very tilted against nuclear. And so there was no way for us to move out of that space. Today, that's a very different perspective. There's a lot of support for nuclear because it is clean, it's base load, it supports the grid, creates a lot of jobs. It's very secure and safe and reliable in all forms of weather. Those are lots of tax dollars. There's all kinds of things that are policy reasons why you'd really like nuclear. Building new nuclear is still a little bit of a challenge. We're still trying to figure that out. And we have some examples from certainly the 70s and 80s, anything that spanned over the 3 Mile Island incident, the cost ballooned, the time frame ballooned. So it was a real challenge. We thought we could get past some of those, and then we built Vogtle 3 and 4, Southern Company did, over in Georgia. And there's various accounts of what the real prices are, but somewhere in the neighborhood of starting around $8 billion and ending around $30 billion, about 6 or 7 years behind schedule. And so that's not ideal for a first rattle out of the box. There are a bunch of folks that are trying to come up with small modular reactors. They have new designs. They have new safety ways to manage the nuclear safety components of it. And so those may be, things that we can accelerate as well. Some of it's going to depend on the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So there's an executive order out there to try to reform the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And nuclear safety is something that is very important, but it has been overdone. 1 in a million year type standards on things can be very, very expensive and not really generate much incremental safety. You can have something that's extremely safe at a much lower standard than that, and not at the same kind of cost. An example might be, you have 4 pumps, and they're deemed to be nuclear safety significant. And because they're nuclear safety significant, each pump might cost you $30 million. But you really only need 2 pumps to run the plant. And so the probability of losing 3 pumps and having to turn off a line, which would create a nuclear, anytime you take the plant off a line, that's an incident that you have to be careful. But the probability of all three out of 4 pumps going down is minuscule. Probably never going to happen in the life of the plant. So if you take that into consideration, you say, okay, well, maybe these pumps aren't nuclear safety significant. Well, now they're $30,000 pumps, $30 million pumps. So the cost comes way in. And then the other part of that is that $30,000 pump I can get from anywhere. But the $30 million pump comes from one supplier. And it goes through crazy, ridiculous testing, and it's going to take me years to get it in. And if I don't install it properly or it's not built properly, I may have to rip it out and start over. And so that's why it just gets more and more expensive, because you've got to get it to such exacting standards because it meets that nuclear safety significance test. You can eliminate some of that stuff with the NRC. If they find a way to go to a more truly risk-based standard that is not so stringent, that the tolerances are just a little bit wider. I heard a story just the other day about the Vogel plant. Some of the rebar that they had put in for the containment building, was off by less than 1/8 of an inch. And they had to rip it all out and start over. And these are walls that are meters thick, with rebar that you can't see through before the concrete goes in. Incredibly, incredibly tough stuff. Is that really the standard that you need? Because, 1 in a million is pretty rare. So anyway, there's an opportunity out there. I say all that. That's a lot of color for what we need to overcome in order to get to building new nuclear. One other thing, small modular reactors, which I'm a big fan of, and there's a real potential there. But I think the name of those is interesting, because they're not necessarily small and they're not necessarily modular. Ontario Power Generation in Canada is building, the first GE ones, and I heard that they had to dig a 10-story hole in the ground to get started. That is significant on-site work. So you hear small modular reactor and you think, oh, well, I'm going to kind of roll it in on a truck and drop it off and plug it in. That is not the way these things are going to work. These are big, big investments.
So what this, and by the way, I'm going to, after this last question, I'm going to throw it out for questions from the audience. But, everything you said underscores there are no perfect solutions here.
That's right.
It's a series of trade-offs, and each decision involves choices, and they're negative as well as positive effects. And you really have to step back and figure those out in a really thoughtful way, which is obviously the purpose of this forum, yes. Is to have conversations about all this. Just one last question, and this is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about, what the influence of Tulane will be on the development of Louisiana and the growth of Louisiana. And we talk a lot about the downtown campus and startups with Tulane. Obviously, Entergy has major effects on the growth of Louisiana, economic growth, in terms of both your customers and the investments you make. How do you think about that? as the CEO of the company about what sort of effect you have or could have or should have in supporting Louisiana?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think it actually enters into the way we think about everything. Our vision statement is "We Power Life," which was, we just had the 20th anniversary of Katrina. It was sort of born from Katrina, with the realization that New Orleans really couldn't do anything until the power was back on in New Orleans. So a few years later, we adopted that vision statement, "We Power Life," and we adopted at the same time 4 key stakeholders: our customers, our employees, our communities, and our owners. And there's an order to that, in the sense that we must have loyal, successful customers. We must have engaged, talented employees. We must have vibrant, growing communities in order for our owners to earn their return. And those 3 are prerequisites, and communities is part of that. We're a rate-regulated utility. We're only going to grow if our community is growing at the same time. And so we do think about what do our actions mean for the community? How can we support the community? We're deeply involved in volunteer hours, and some of the things you were talking about earlier are our people going out into the community and making a difference in what they do, part of what they do during the day, but then even after they leave their work. And so that's a critical part of who we are and what we do, and we think about it in every decision that we make.
Great. Questions? Do we have a...
What is the biggest challenge in balancing the legal obligations to reliability and affordability with the investment needed for resilience and clean energy transition?
That's a good question. I don't know where that came from, but it was out there. So we were talking earlier about how Meta thinks about this. The number one thing, really, truly, the number one thing is affordability. What does the bill look like? In particular, some of the areas that we serve are some of the most disadvantaged, economically disadvantaged areas of the country. So we have to think about that. Also, a lot of our large industrial customers are extremely sensitive to prices. If they're competing in a global commodity market, and our prices were to go shooting upward, that could end their ability to compete in our service territory. That's the number one thing. Closely behind that is the reliability, and I would add in sort of resilience, our ability to get back after a big storm. Because the reliability is what's happening to me every day, and do I have good quality of service, which is an evolving expectation. It's not the expectation that we had when you and I were kids, and we were using pencil sharpeners that cranked and chalkboards and stuff like that. Everything is digital today, so the expectation for electricity today is very different, and that expectation for reliability is going up every day for a grid that was built back then for that expectation. So working through that. Resilience is important because people want to know I can get back, and that's an economic trade-off, right? If the power goes off, and maybe you didn't spend a whole lot to keep it up, but now you're down for a month and you got to incur, lost wages, and you get travel costs and spoiled food and lost economic output and all that. That's really, really expensive. It adds up to a lot more than just investing in the grid. So there is an economic trade-off that shows up in the bill initially, but if you don't do it, it's going to show up in something else much more expensively later. And then, unfortunately, the last thing is sustainability. There are some of us that are very focused on it, but by and large, the world is not focused on sustainability. Less so today than it was 2 years ago, to be sure, but it is something that is going to come back around. That's what we believe. I mentioned our goals earlier. These are things that cycle around. And certainly younger generations have a very different expectation of what that should be. And I expect that over time, sustainability is going to move up in that pecking order. But where the world sits today, to satisfy all of our stakeholders, we are certainly working with the ones that want to move the needle on sustainability as much as we can. And the good news for us is those are the guys with trillion-dollar balance sheets. They want to move the needle there, and they will make a difference. And I do believe we'll get to the goals that we have, at least certainly the 2050 goal with their help.
That's why I asked about changing views in Silicon Valley. Another question.
As a leader in the energy industry, how do you stay on top of policy and market changes and anticipate the necessary changes you need to make?
I spend a lot of time in Washington, D.C. More time than I ever thought that I would spend in Washington, D.C. Leading up to, and I don't know what it's called now. I heard that the name just changed. I'll call it the Reconciliation Bill, because I don't remember what the name is now. I spent probably, I was up in D.C. at least every other week the first 6 months of this year working on that. And we're still working on that. And it's an incredible amount of work to stay connected and advocate for things that are going to impact our customers. And that's really what we're doing. I'm up there trying to advocate on behalf of our customers. Things that will help keep costs down, things that will help advocate for things that our customers care about, like sustainability and resilience investment, support from the government. Some of the funding that came from the IRA from the previous administration, trying to keep some of that in place to help our existing customer base. We spent a lot of time thinking about that. So much more these days than we did before.
One last question.
Unfortunately, we do not have any more time.
Oh, I got the hook. What can I say? Anyway, Drew, this has been great. I think everyone got a sense of literally almost every issue facing our society in many years comes onto your plate, because energy impacts literally everything. And I'm sure every stakeholder has a different view about how it should evolve, but I think everybody be glad that you're the one leading this discussion and thinking through the future in this industry, because it's critical not only to Louisiana, to the Gulf South, but to the country. So let's have a round of applause.
Thank you.
For Drew Marsh. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you for joining us for this session. Our next session in this space will be the Energy Industry Explained, Trends, Pressures, and Possibilities, a conversation with Jim Burke, which is scheduled to start in just a few moments.